Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this clown decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And today, no need for much of an introduction. I was interested because there is a nearly 2 hour interview with Ash Sarkar and Aaron Bastani saying this is why the right are winning and what I got wrong by Ash Sarkar. And to be honest with you, I was quite interested to see what she had learned over the past few years, because she's not really been in the limelight as much as when she was in the Corbyn years about 6 or 7 years ago. She is still invited to the BBC, more than she probably should be, to give off the same diatribe she always gave off, but if she is going on camera and saying I got things wrong, I'm kind of interested to see what she thinks she got wrong, because she's doing interview tours at the moment because she's got a book coming out called Minority Rule. And in the description from the publisher, it says most of us are getting screwed over. Our world is defined by inequality, insecurity, lack of community, and information overload. As the world burns, mega corporations are reporting record profits. How are they getting away with it? So quite clearly she is still as communist as she always was. I wasn't expecting any changes there. Minority rule is a term Sarkar uses to describe the irrational fear that minorities are trying to overturn and oppress majority populations. In her eye-opening debut, she reveals how minority elites rule majorities by creating the culture wars that have taken over our politics, stoking fear and panic in our media landscape. Because despite what they'll have you believe, anti-racist campaigners aren't actually silencing the forgotten working class, immigrants aren't eating your pets, trans activists aren't corrupting your children, and cancel culture isn't crushing free speech. Which, from everything I can read there, she has learned absolutely nothing, which is why I'm even more intrigued to go through at least some of this interview. There's no way I'm going through the whole thing, I can't stand her. In Minority Rule, Sarkar exposes how strategic misdirection of blame over who is really screwing everything up is keeping the majority divided. Yeah, we saw that actually. USAID has actually been shown to be giving money to Rory Stewart's wife to teach Afghanistanis about a urinal. It was a piece of artwork, there's no point going into detail about it. While the real ruling minority of hedge fund managers, press barons, landlords and corporations remain on top, all these things that are still relatively woke over in Europe and Britain, and all of a sudden when Trump got in, yeah, they've dropped it all. Again, all of these people, generally, maybe not landlords, were on the side of Ash Sarkar with the type of politics that they were pushing, and she doesn't even realise it. She doesn't realise that she was part of the cultural hegemon, because being part of the cultural hegemon does not help her image of being this, radical extremist. Because what's radical or extreme about being part of the hegemon? And it facilitates one of the biggest power grabs in history. Most crucially, it shows us how what we really have in common is being concealed by deafening culture of distraction, and that the first step towards a better future is understanding what is happening now and how we got here. So as you can see, it's not really worth reading. But I do think it's worth seeing what lessons she's actually learned, because I get the feeling it's just going to be really funny. Anyway, these videos always take ages for me, so I won't waste any more of your time. Let's get to the interview.
I made the classic mistake of thinking my world was the world, and I thought that there were more people like me than there were.
Don't worry, Ash, you're definitely not the only person who makes that mistake on the internet. But it is quite funny how she thought she was in the minority, and yet at the same time, for some reason, she thought, oh yeah, everyone agrees with me. How do you think that? How did it take you to realise you have the cognitive dissonance of, oh, I'm this minority radical, but also everyone actually agrees with me? I suppose it's the classic communist mistake of, oh, I'm doing everything for the working class interests, or I guess with the post-modern slant, minorities and gay people as well. And it turns out, oh, no, you're actually not. Most people just think you're crazy. It took her years to work that out. Incredible.
But I forgot that, in the words of, LBJ, the first rule of politics is learn how to count. 5 or 6 years ago, I found the idea of doing that so scary.
Yeah, this is something I just simply can't relate to. I've kind of always known I've had a minority opinion on quite a few things, so that I know my fight to try and win electorally has always been to have to make concessions. There's a few concessions I have to make with reform. Oh well, it'll get us power and get us out of this runt that we've been in as a country for the past few decades. Ash's problem is that she thought she could brainwash everyone. She probably thought she could do that because she kept being invited onto the BBC, not realising she is part of the reason people don't watch the BBC anymore.
So scared of being wrong. So scared of having my view of the world shaken up. by new information.
Yeah, from the description of your book, Ash, I feel like that is still a problem with you. This is why I already find this completely disingenuous. I actually find it quite amazing that you can come here onto an interview, and we'll see how the interview goes, but with the title effectively being What I Got Wrong, and then effectively your book that's coming out is actually making the same mistakes. It's the hedge fund managers. It's the landlords that are splitting up the majority. It's the corporations that are all these right-wing lewds. It's just nonsense. It's total nonsense. They've all been having to comply with ESG, which was brought up by BlackRock, the biggest corporation in America. Well, not the biggest, but one of the biggest corporations in America, who effectively told corporations how they have to be run, otherwise they won't be eligible as much for investments and loans. Literally social conditioning that you largely would agree with, because it was all this post-modern woke leftist wonky stuff that nobody liked. Hence they had to force companies to comply with it. And here you are pretending they were against it for years. Get out of here. You've learned nothing.
Getting that bit older, I'm like, okay, like not only is this not scary, you're gonna have to suck it up, buttercup, and look at the ways in which you've been wrong, and look at the ways in which your own social world has blinded you, because if you don't, you're gonna lose.
You've already lost, sunshine. Trump's in over in America. The right wing's rising all over Europe. Farage and Reform are constantly ahead in the polls. That's even despite going on about, well, Richard Tice recently going on about climate change being false, which I don't agree with. But even that, which is very much against what the people of Britain think, it's not slowed them down in the polls. They're still rising like ever before. It's over. You've lost. You need a completely different paradigm to think about here, and you're not doing it. At least from what I can read of the description of your book. From what it looks like, your book is literally 10 years out of date already. You'll have your superfans read it, everyone else will just think it's a waste of time as usual. Anyway, they start talking about the book in the interview.
There's an introduction where I think I go through an argument which you make, which is that everyone is black-pilled now. There is such a profound loss of trust and breakdown of the social contract that no matter who you are in this country, whether you're a homeowner or a renter, or you live in Barnsley or you live in Hackney, you feel like hard work isn't rewarded, that there's no point having trust in politicians, and though you consume an awful lot of media, you can't trust what it is you're hearing.
Yeah, that's all true. It's largely down to, oh wow, we're taxed an awful lot. I feel like the money that is being robbed off me isn't going to decent, well, mainly public services. That's what people are mostly complaining about. Everyone knows the NHS is terrible. You always see the odd post of, oh, I love the NHS, look at the doctors that look after me. It's kind of like, well, yeah, that's their job. But everyone knows Britain is broken, and effectively the issue with Novara Media is that all the worst parts of Britain being broken, they actually want but worse. And yeah, I directly attribute a breakdown of media trust, in part to Ash Sarkar. She's constantly invited onto these panels to help, well, push the line that an awful lot of the new elite want pushed. It's that simple. She's part of the issue, and she doesn't actually realise that. She still thinks she's on the outside. How can you think that? You're still invited to the BBC.
I think that resonates a lot with what you've said of everyone is black-pilled now, and that is a left and right-wing phenomenon.
Yeah, both sides are black-pilled, but you'll notice that it's usually using right-wing's terms. Black-pill just means depressed, sure, but it is very much from right-wing circles where the whole pill phenomenon came from. All originates from Mencius Mollbug, Curtis Yarvin, referring to it as being blue-pilled and red-pilled. Are you aware of the lies that the media are telling you, or are you not? And Ash Sarkar's still blue-pilled as much as Novara Media pretend that they're not.
And then the first chapter is called How the I Took Over Identity Politics, because it is fundamentally a criticism of the left.
Yeah, but again, from the description I've read, the left didn't go on about my pet issues hard enough, which is going to be a tough sell, but let's give her a chance. Let's see what she has to say.
The rest of the book is really about right-wing identity politics and how the right mobilise identity politics.
Oh, cripes. Right. Successful right-wing identity politics is effectively saying, no, we're all actually a united country, let's not have these boxes. The woke right, if you really want to call them that, they're the ones that took the left-wing paradigm here and said, hang on, why don't we just apply this to white people and straight people and Christians? And it's stuff that just isn't working. It's just not working. I don't know yet if Ash Sarkar really means more that type of politics or basically the politics of normal people. You know, the politics of Britain should be welcoming to people who are not breaking our laws and are actually adding to our economy, which probably isn't that many people, by the way, at least compared to with the total numbers that we have over. But they also say, of course, to be British, you have to be part of the peoples. You can have people over, immigrants, who don't join in with the British peoples and are effectively tourists their whole time. But these type of people wouldn't pretend to be British anyway, but this is where the problem's got in. You've got people who try and undermine Britishness and British identity at every possible avenue, and then they'll hide behind the shield of, oh yeah, but I'm British really, you know, I was born here and I was raised here. And because integration efforts have been absolutely decimated and not been tried at all really by any particular government policy, yeah, it's unfortunately it's ingrained. Hence we've ended up with a culture war. But this is the thing, I have no idea what Ash means here. Go on, what is right-wing identity politics?
But I realised that I couldn't write that without looking at the origins of some of these ideas and tactics, which really originate from us.
Yeah, you were quite open about that forever. I'm not counting this as you learning anything. You pushed these tactics forever and then were shocked that the right picked them up. What did you expect? It's like all the people I've been arguing about Dresden with recently. The Nazis bombed the absolute pants off English and other European countries' cities. Why did they not expect to be bombed back?
What's wrong with identity as a basis for politics?
Well, I suppose the first thing to say is that identity is always important. The question is how important and to what extent is it going to shape your political horizons?
I'd say this is a wrong starting point anyway. Yes, identity is important, but then to instantly go to, oh, how important is it in politics? It's, well, no, already that's a bit of an issue. You actually have multiple identities overlapping all at once in yourself. For instance, some people see themselves as white before anything else. I myself see myself as British before anything else, yes, including English, whereas some people see themselves as English before they are British. And so that kind of identity has to be addressed first. You know, do you see yourself more defined by your genes, your heritage, the people who came before you? Do you identify more with values that you see on a day-to-day level, habits that you enjoy, hell, the hobbies you have as well? You know, I'm a gamer. That's an identity. I'm a YouTuber. That's another part of my identity. How often do they come up in my politics? Well, you know, from my YouTubing side, not much. From my gaming side, I want politics out of my games. Now, does that mean I don't want, you know, a 1984 style story? No, that's not what that means. That means I don't want stuff like gay and trans rights constantly talked about thousands of years in the future when, frankly, pretty much everyone knows it's a very contemporary issue that's probably going to be seen as a 20-year mass hysteria moment in the history books. Luckily, that war seems to be over now. We seem to pretty much be past woke gaming almost. I mean, you'll still get the odd stragglers coming out of the woke gaming era, but it's over. But as I say, Ash Sarkar's kind of got the question wrong in the first place. How important is identity in politics? Very. Which part of identity is important in politics? That's a much more clear question.
All of us are interested in who we are and how we're perceived. That's just a part of being human.
Who we are, I agree with. How we're perceived, have you been on the internet? There are an awful lot of people, in my experience, and they do not care what other people think or how they're perceived. There are other people that are hypersensitive of that. Ash Sarkar is one of those people, by the way. Hence, a lot of her politics are based around what is annoying the opposite group and what is making my group really happy. The problem is that she's fed up of losing now, so she's had to kind of redefine that. And oddly enough, she actually cares less about how she's perceived these days, which is actually coming across in this interview.
My theory is the reason why that's so important is because look at us as humans. We've got no claws, no fangs, no real means of defending ourselves in the wild. The thing that we've got is sociality. So of course, who we are and who we're perceived to be is incredibly important.
Well, yeah, that is a survival mechanism, one that not everyone necessarily has. Hence, some people are obviously outcast from society. And, these are the type of people, some of them, not all of them, genuinely just won't care that that is how they're perceived. They'll feel like they can get along by themselves. Which in the age of mass society is largely true, because you don't need to know someone very well to trade your money for their food. But it is absolutely true. I mean, I love how she's saying, oh, my theory is, and then it's this really, really basic evolutionary psychology theory that has basically been proven throughout time. This isn't an original thought, Ash. This is something that you probably read on Twitter.
The problem with a focus on identity is that it, I think, bakes in a sense that we have opposing interests, that attention is a finite resource and that we're always in competition with each other for it.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie here. I'm a little bit lost with what her point is.
And I think that it breaks down our collective power, which is, I think, the only tool humans have ever had to transform society.
Okay, I'm not being funny. In a sense, kind of. In a much more broad sense, especially if you go down the route of the great man of history, no. Trying to steal Mano's position here, because she was a bit all over the place there, is that by definition identity politics will make people, effectively it will activate peoples in groups and out-groups and make people think, well, it is a zero-sum game. If, I don't know, white people lose out to, positive, affirmative action, that's it, then they lose out on stuff. The problem is that that's actually true. People probably wouldn't mind if it was just the civil rights and that was it. It ended there. People probably wouldn't mind. Everyone liked the 90s and noughties from the looks of it. And you could argue that that was identity politics to an extent, but realistically it's seen as a time of, oh, we're all Americans, we should all have the same rights. I'm using America as the example. Britain didn't have as much of an issue with that. But then, to confuse things, bringing it over to Britain, you bring in an Equality Act, and then all of a sudden you have certain identity groups having more rights, it feels like, than others, and then all of a sudden, yeah, this is what people are going to start thinking. However, I take it Ash's counter to this is going to be, well, you can have identity politics and, see yourself as a brown person, but then actually sell it as, oh, this is actually good for white people to have these brown interests seen. The problem is that that's exactly what we've had for the past few years, but I suppose I shouldn't assume a position. Maybe she's learned something from the failures of the past 10 years of her politics. Let's find out.
It's one class becoming big enough and strong enough to overthrow the one above it. And
yeah, so I think I steelmanned that pretty well. I'd like to see what the solution to this problem is from Ash.
That's why, this is a Marxist book in the sense that Marx's theory of historical change is really important.
I just left that bit in to let you know, yeah, it's absolutely pointless reading this book. Don't bother. Like most Marxism, it's all absolute nonsense and pie in the sky, wishful fairy tales. That's pretty much it.
And that's sort of the starting point. Why hasn't the working class gotten big enough and strong enough to overthrow the bourgeoisie?
Oh, because effectively the working class has become middle class in the sense that the middle class have had their wage compressed for the past 10 years or so. Wage compression is a real thing. You go to university, you're going to waste 3 years to effectively end up with a job that's not getting you that much more money than working at a shop full time. So not only that, but on top of that, wealth redistributions, like our third largest public spending bracket, top it's pensions, or it might be health, I can't remember. Second it's pensions or health, doesn't really matter. Third it's direct wealth redistribution, through benefits, PIP, universal credit, social housing, whatever. It's absolutely massive. And so it's like, why aren't the working class rising up? It's like, well, what have they got to rise up against? They benefit from the system massively. Absolutely massively. Whereas the productive are getting they're getting a kick in the teeth effectively via taxation and the fact that everything sucks in the country. But the thing is that the middle class won't, collectively have action against this government because they can actually just afford to move. And that's kind of their collective action. We're all going to move to Australia or Canada and things like that. And I know loads of people that have done it and loads of people that want to do it. That's why there's no rising up, because people are free to leave. If you weren't free to leave, you'd probably see riots.
And the thing that I'm looking at is the rise of identity politics as part of why that's the case.
I mean, yeah, that's probably also a massive issue. If you start saying white people are evil from a left-wing perspective and your massive cohorts of the working class are white, of course they're not going to rise up with you. Like, well done for working that out. Again, you haven't come to this conclusion by yourself. This was a point made back in 2014. Even I remember this being said by people like Carl, and even people in the mainstream.
You know, when I talk about the rise of identity politics, I'm not just talking about the identity politics of the left. I'm also talking about the way in which social media gives us, you know, tailored feeds. It makes us feel that what we're paying attention to is the entire world. And I think that the way in which identity is being understood as founded in notions of irreducible difference, right? You being Iranian, me being Bengali, that's too different for us to find any kind of common cause, or maybe it's gender, or maybe it's sexuality, or whatever. That's a product of neoliberalism.
What the... What do you mean? I'm not having this nonsense. Again, neoliberalism is just everything I don't like. That's all people mean by it. No, neoliberalism is a very specific and very much only an economic idea. All it is a reaction to Keynesianism and the post-war consensus. That's all neoliberalism is. It's a let's have Victorian economic policy, but bring it into the 20th century. That's all it was. And you have people like Ash Sarkar still saying, oh, neoliberalism is actually racism. You know, it's what says that no one who's Bengali, like Ash Sarkar, although I thought she was British, cannot relate to Aaron Bastani because he's Iranian, though again, I thought he was British too. At least with Aaron Bastani, he actually is half British, I believe. Again, I just want to point out they will never refer to themselves as British unless the right wing are there saying they're not British. I just want to point that out. Anyway, she needs to explain how identity politics is a product of neoliberalism. It's absolutely not. It is almost entirely a product of critical theory, which was, well, it's always been quite popular in 20th century universities, especially in sociology departments, because that's directly a Marxist subject. I only found that out like a year ago, and I was not surprised. And from there, that's actually where identity politics developed, saying, you know, different groups of people will, by definition, have different interests, permanently almost, and it will mean that there's basically no such thing as integration, so you need to do everything that they want. That's a really dumbed down version of what they say, but to call that neoliberalism is just moronic. What did Margaret Thatcher do that pushed that?
And it's also something which is deepened by our economic conditions.
Our economic conditions are that we've literally in the world never been more prosperous. We've stagnated, sure, since 2008 and not really recovered from there. But if you want to say 2008 was the peak, we've really not gone that far down since 2008. What economic conditions entrench the idea of, you know, black and white people can't get on? You know? Like, what is the economic conditions that enforce that?
Economic conditions are making us, I think, more hostile and suspicious of one another.
Well, I mean, that would largely happen when you find out that an awful lot of your tax money is going toward things like educating Afghanistanis about ridiculous postmodern art. And you see an awful lot of your tax money going to council houses to house a bunch of foreigners in London. Yeah, that's going to annoy people. Not because they're black, not because they're not white, a lot of them probably are foreign white people, but because no one likes to have their money taken off them to be given to people that are not paying into the system. It just feels unfair. It feels like you've been taken for a ride, and that's a problem that needs to be solved. But to just deflect it and say, yeah, you know, they're just racist because of economic conditions, it's ridiculous. Just stop taking my money and giving it to people I don't want it given to. That's all you need to do. Anyway, Ash is asked more directly where she thinks it all came from.
So the term identity politics was coined by the Combahee River Collective, and they released this really famous Combahee River Collective statement.
Ash doesn't mention it, but the Combahee River Collective was a black feminist lesbian socialist organisation active in Boston and Massachusetts from 1974 to 1980. I would say that is very relevant to the conversation about to be had. And the conversation before as well, because how does a black feminist lesbian socialist organisation coin the term identity politics while at the same time you say identity politics comes from neoliberalism? Unless you're trying to claim that, oh, neoliberalism caused the economic conditions that made this necessary, as if this all isn't derived from, you know, 1930s Frankfurt School. Like, come on.
And their idea of identity politics was fundamentally anti-capitalist, and the importance of identity was that it gave them a vantage point on the labour market. So being black American women that gave them a point of view on how capitalism worked.
Yeah, again, one not only is this nuts just by definition, I don't think I need to go much into that, but again, I want to get to the point of identity politics is a result of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism didn't become policy until the 80s with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. How is a socialist organisation that formed before neoliberalism was even close to being put into policy in America and Britain, America in this case, how could that possibly be a result of neoliberalism? Oh, we're talking about capitalism. Okay, I suppose you're in America, so there's a bit more of a point that you could say that than in Britain. But again, it's all just nonsense. This is all derived from Frankfurt School and critical theory, and it's all derived from there. It doesn't seem to cross Ash Sarkar's mind that this collective could have just been completely wrong about their analysis on what was going on around them. Having a unique view on capitalism, basically to this point, just means they're wrong. Not because they're black, because they're idiots.
That was the point. It wasn't that, we've won the Identity Olympics because we've got all these intersections. It was, this gives us a sense of what's really going on here.
Yeah, but again, there's a reason that she's not saying that it was specifically a black feminist lesbian socialist organisation. Because just saying they're black, that gives her a bit of an excuse to not bring intersectionality into it. But given that they're a black feminist lesbian socialist society, yeah, it doesn't really help that claim, Ash. There's a reason you are not saying they're a lesbian socialist organisation, and I think it's pretty obvious why.
I also look at the Black Panthers and how they worked across different identity groups. They really didn't think that language was that important.
No, but this was a time when you still had a Soviet Union, and socialism was seen as being able to somewhat succeed and actually be in competition with America. This all fell apart in the 90s when the Soviet Union collapsed, because it was the biggest example of socialism and communism completely crumbling and failing. And so they lost all their rhetorical power then, because everyone thought, we beat communists. That's it, we've won. It's the end of history. That's why they didn't have to focus so much on this identity stuff. This identity stuff more came about because, well, frankly, it's in America. There was racism going on at the time. That's why they had their identity politics there. Why weren't they as big over in Britain? Why did they have to run off the identity politics of America and, use a lot of American language in Britain with the identity politics over here? Because it wasn't as relevant here. There's a reason she keeps going on about America, and it's not neoliberalism or because they're more capitalist or anything. It's because frankly, they had a more ingrained history of racism than we do here. That's the reason, but she's not going to say that, because at the end of the day, all she's trying to do is get communism instilled into everyone's minds. And it's not going to work, because this is the same tactics I've always seen her use. Lie and obfuscate history to try and say it's all capitalism's fault. Again, amazingly, this is neoliberalism's fault. Why are you referencing things that happened and came about before neoliberalism then? Come on. Anyway, we're skipping ahead to talking about woke. I don't want to go through this for too long.
Well, I think you really have to look at the period in between the shooting of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman, which is when the first emergence of BLM happens. Okay,
again, I just want you to bear in mind that she was asked what are the games of woke and what were the tactics used by woke, and apparently the starting of it is the Trayvon Martin incident. But yeah, the Trayvon Martin shooting, as far as I'm aware, we're never going to really know what happened between Zimmerman and Martin. He was acquitted by a jury of his peers for second-degree murder and manslaughter. Effectively, in court of law, he was found to be committing self-defence. Do we know that for sure? Not really. It's more that there was not enough evidence to say that he just murdered Trayvon Martin straight up.
And I guess Trump's inauguration. Those are the dates that I'd say you'd have to look at.
Sorry, the games of woke are Trayvon Martin being shot and the reaction to it, and Trump's inauguration. I'm sorry, but I suppose I've got a bit of a bias because I'm a gamer, but Gamergate really did start a lot of people on the noticing train, and that was all against feminism. But I guess Ash Sarkar's biases are more to do with race. But again, kind of nuts that Trayvon Martin's the example rather than George Floyd. I imagine because the Trayvon Martin incident is much more defensible than George Floyd, now that we've all had hindsight and realised that, George Floyd was actually it was a massive woke cultural victory at the time, but I think in the long term, clearly it's not worked well. Trump's back in office. There's no appetite for BLM anymore. As it turned out, it was all a scam. And that's what woke always is. A lot of the time, it's a scam. Was it with Trayvon Martin? I've no idea. I don't know the details of that one well enough. Black Lives Matter and George Floyd? Absolutely. No doubt about it. It was an excuse to get people rioting throughout America and then get a load of money together so that some Black Lives Matter leaders could get some mansions. That was largely it. And the scam doesn't work anymore. People don't believe it anymore. People don't think that the world's ending now that Trump's in. Apart from maybe a few media and European elites. But, their time's up too. Nobody likes the world we live in anymore. There needs to be quite a bit of a change.
During that time, other things happen, including the Me Too movement, the, famous trans tipping point, and that people who have made it through universities where, we met at university. That's a time for political exploration and working things out.
The problem with Ash Sarkar that I've always noticed that she always starts talking all over the place when it's clear she doesn't really know what she's talking about, which, is a lot of the time. Where are you going with this? You're asked, can you name a time where the games of woke is really, really noticeable? And she's gone from Trayvon Martin to Donald Trump to, now let's talk about us at university. Like, what are you talking about? You're asked what the games of woke are. Why are you talking about meeting Aaron Bastani at university?
And that may be some of these, norms around language policing. They go from university into the workplace because that's what those individuals are doing. They're going from the university into the workplace.
That's certainly part of the problem, but a much bigger one that she can never touch is BlackRock and ESG. And, it was by coercion, effectively, from large corporations. They all had to be woke. Why do you think overnight everyone started going on about Black History Month? Everyone started going on about LGBT. It wasn't the graduates coming in. It was the HR department saying, right, here's the ESG, just, follow it. We have to comply with it, otherwise it's going to make problems for the company. Everyone else goes, right, okay, we don't want problems, so we'll just do it. And now it turns out everyone hates it, and now basically nobody cares about LGBT month anymore in America. Nobody cares about Black History Month in America anymore. Britain has dying embers of it because we still have true believers in our parliament. It'll go overnight if reform are brought in. I guarantee it.
So I think those are the dates that you'd be looking at for, the heyday of liberal identity politics.
I'm going to have to skip a load of this interview again because she's just annoying me again. Didn't answer the question at all. Like, what are the games of woke and when was a good time to say it happened? She may as well have just said, well, obviously the last 10 years. But no, she goes all the way back to Trayvon Martin for some reason, which, again, I don't have much memory of that particular incident. I remember George Floyd a lot more because half America looked like it was on fire. Does she mention that? No. Does she mention the Seattle Chaz? No. She tries to just have, here's, good examples of woke, companies caring about LGBT matters. Everyone having resistance against Donald Trump. Trayvon Martin, there's basically no conservative argument against him being acquitted. I mean, I don't know enough, but I assume that's her mindset here. And that's like three really minor examples. Again, Me Too, I guess she brought up as well, but it's just kind of nuts, isn't it, that we've had over a decade of wokeness in reality. If we're going back to Trayvon Martin, and she could basically only come up with 2 examples of what she saw as positive wokeness, and yet will still defend it. This is how ridiculous Ash Sarkar is. She had to go back 10 years, and whenever Trayvon Martin was shot, when was it, 2012? 13 years for her examples of good wokeness. Literally, according to her, there was pretty much a decade of bad wokeness. That is what I've just learned from Ash Sarkar. So, man, screw it. We're just going to skip to the part where she starts talking about what she's learned.
Here's a quote from page 46. Identity politics has become a largely middle-class preoccupation due to its spread in elite universities. We've already said that. The ideology isn't being shared in a context where the goal is to get people to work together towards the goal of social transformation. It's in the competitive yakety-yak of arts and humanities seminars.
Yeah, this is the problem. That's pretty much what it always was. Again, going back to the Black Panthers, they were against actual racism going on. Yeah, they probably took that racism and just went with it the complete opposite direction rather than doing the Martin Luther King thing of, hey, we're all Americans, how about we all try and treat each other like Americans? But this stuff that takes it too far is basically away from middle class people, as Ash Sarkar is saying here, to feel radical. The problem is that, as I say, that's pretty much how it always has been. I mean, it spread into universities. No, it came from universities. It was always in universities. It was just taking critical theory back from the Frankfurt School in the 30s and applying it to race rather than just being more of it's about general dominant and oppressed groups. They applied that specifically to race, gender, etc., etc. And basically everyone hates it. Don't try and make it out like it was originally, this is just how the working class think. I mean, how can you say you've learned things and then try and claim that? This has never been a working class outlook, unless you're a radical Marxist who believes in fairy tales.
That's the same incubation tank that I sprang from. One where the stakes were no higher than your own personal academic status, and the goal was to prove how much smarter you were than everybody else.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily being smarter, it's being perceived as being smarter. And from arts and humanities people that I know, being smarter is effectively how woke can I get. That might change in the next few years, but I doubt it.
The overeducated and insecure probably aren't the best people for creating a healthy political culture. It's not exactly the most useful approach to take if you're trying to organise people to work collectively.
Well, I don't think the problem is necessarily the overeducated, and, Ash Sarkar is definitely overeducated. The problem is that the overeducated will... It's a problem you'll see with, like, Rory Stewart and all these different left-wing political commentators. It's just that they have a worldview and all their intelligence is put into effectively trying to rationalise that worldview. Whereas political commentators, generally on the right, maybe not including Fraser Nelson here, they'll put their brain power into actually, trying to solve the problem that they see. And it doesn't take too much convincing because effectively they'll say, yeah, we notice these are the problems. From what we can tell, this is what's causing the problem. Here's our solutions. And they're not always correct, sure, but it's a lot of their brain power isn't spent on basically trying to fight a rhetorical battle against, fantasy, frankly. So, Ash Sarkar's kind of right, but not fully right.
Now, there are people who don't like you, don't like me, don't like Navarra, hate the left.
Of course I know him. He's me.
They'll hear that or read that. I hope they read it. They should buy the book. They'll be jumping for joy. They'll be saying, she gets it.
No, but again, it's a facade. I don't think she really believes this for a start. Her main point is, these humanities, they're overeducated, and because of that, they can't really, connect with the working class properly. She's still playing identity politics with that paragraph. And secondly, she's not saying that they're wrong. That's the fundamental issue here. They are wrong. But the problem is that she agrees with them. She basically just thinks that you need someone like, I don't know, Mick Lynch from the train unions to be the one who, becomes the leader of the collective of the working class. The problem, again, with Mick Lynch is that basically everyone who works for the trains is middle class because they're all paid so well. And if they're not all middle class, there will be working class people there. Well, there's your other problem. They're not all of the same class. Again, because Ash Sarkar's entire worldview is wrong. So what this book isn't so much Ash Sarkar realises she got a lot wrong. It's more Ash Sarkar is now trying to pretend that the problem is the leaders of the woke movements rather than the fact that the woke movements are wrong in and of themselves. So no, she doesn't get it.
When did that realisation hit you?
I actually took talking a lot with my husband, who I think because he comes from a small town near Barnsley and his brother lives in a small town in Yorkshire still.
I only mention this because it is genuinely relevant, but Ash Sarkar did marry a white Brit. So with all this stuff of the wokery and all that, and our collective identity groups, she still integrates. I've said it a lot of times before. Not a lot of difference between Ash Sarkar and Owen Jones, other than the gender. So again, I just do not believe she is a true believer in all this. It's all, once again, just a grift. And the grift on the left now is to effectively try and pretend that they get it. Unfortunately, they keep talking, and it makes it very obvious that they still don't get it.
And him and his brother have had very, very different life paths, right? So obviously, my husband moved to London, got a brown and bougie girlfriend, now brown and bougie wife.
Oh, God, cringe.
His brother did a lot of travelling, didn't go to uni, works in a factory in Huddersfield, lives nearby. So very different life experiences, very different life worlds. And I think that him sort of being a bit between, being part of, this, graduate without a future class in London, but also having this connection through his family to a world that wasn't like that, meant that where I was maybe a bit blind to the biases and preoccupations of the graduate-dominated left, he wasn't.
Yeah, when Ash Sarkar says, "Oh, I finally get it now," all she really means is, "Oh, I now realise that I am of the class that is never going to be able to convince these people because, oh, I'm brown and bougie," as she says. Yeah, you went to university. You you were given an awful lot of opportunities by this country that you seem to constantly hate. I would imagine that your brother-in-law doesn't hate the country, but is hating the direction it's going. And I'm wondering what your answer is to all that, because I'm guessing it's actually, well, you know what the Tories did, but we pretend they didn't. We want them to do that, but harder.
And so at home, we'd be talking about this all the time. And he would say, well, this focus on policing language, what terms people use, what they're not allowed to use, what's appropriation, what wasn't. This is university graduates who are middle class telling everyone else what they should think and say.
Again, how's it taken your husband saying exactly what you were told by Piers Morgan, among other right-wing commentators, to finally get this into your head? How has he not mentioned that to you before, actually? You're married. How has he not mentioned before that, yeah, your primary way of going about trying to convince people you are correct is nothing but patronising? They must have been going out for years, and he's only just mentioned this recently. If you can't tell, I am basically saying I don't think she's telling the truth here. I think, once again, what has happened is Ash has realised that a grift is coming to an end, and now they all have to do, effectively, a faux apology tour, and then pretend to be post-liberal. That's exactly what Aaron Bastani's done. And the problem is that they've got so much baggage because everyone remembers them. No one's going to believe them. They are known to lie. They are known to put up these facades. And I need a damn good reason to trust that this isn't just another facade now.
And when he said that, I was so resistant to it at first.
When did he say that?
Oh, this was, I guess,
For the first time?
Maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
I'm not being funny, but I can imagine that ended up in quite a big argument where effectively he was called Piers Morgan. As she says, she was resistant to it, but what did it take for her to believe it? Oh, for her entire worldview to be completely beaten at the ballot box by Donald Trump. And now, obviously, everywhere else in Europe, the right wing are rising. Reform's winning polls quite consistently at this point. I didn't think we'd be here by now. We're about 3 years early to what I thought would happen. So it's just crumbling around her completely. And so now we get these faux apologies. I don't believe her. She's lied too much in the past. And from the explanations they're going through, she still doesn't get it anyway.
So I was definitely writing the book, and we were having this conversation at the same time. And I was very resistant to it at first. And then I gave it some thought. And this is also the great thing about writing a book rather than fast turnaround articles and videos, is that you can really be with your thoughts and not feel a sense of threat from other people's judgment because you're just having to work it out by yourself.
Ash, once again, I do not think you ever felt threat from other people's judgment or their comments. You did nothing but ignore them for years. You're not gonna have me buy that all of a sudden, oh, I love writing books because people weren't critical. You thrive off the criticism because it gives you an excuse to up your profile once again, and it gets you invited to the BBC. So don't give me that. Having said that, she is correct that writing a book does... again, she put it wrong again. Oh, it lets you avoid criticism from fast-paced panels. No. The reason it's advantageous is because it lets you distill your own thoughts. It lets you think about your ideas. It allows you to run your own thought experiments in your own time, rather than having to react to someone else giving you all these questions. It allows you effectively to internalise your own criticisms. And the problem we have here is that your criticisms only go as far as, okay, but how does this help us win? And because of that, it means that you wrote another pointless book that, again, is like 10 years too late.
I really thought about it, and I thought about language policing, and I thought about the emphasis on discourse. This fits into that discourse, therefore it's problematic. I was like, shit, this is what I was trained to do as a literature student.
Hold on, you were trained as a literature student to police language and then tell other people what discourse is okay and what discourse isn't. Are you kidding me? I'm not being funny, but if I had that realization, I would probably ask for a refund on my education at the very least. I mean, seriously, this realization, what did you do with it, Ash? Because, again, as from what I can see, you've not learned how that's actually bad. And you seem to just want to do the same thing, but with other tactics.
I was trained to look at language, pick it apart, look for the problems, look for the contradictions, and then leave them there. Now, I think that's valuable when you're looking at a novel or you're looking at a piece of philosophy or whatever.
Yeah, there's contradictions in life absolutely everywhere. I do agree. Again, I would argue I managed to do all this better than Ash Sarkar, and my formal training for English does not go beyond GCSE.
But if you're trying to work together to a shared goal, being hyperfixated on language and problems and contradictions doesn't help you get there.
Yeah, this is what I mean. Ash Sarkar has not learned anything about her core worldview. She thinks it's still all correct. Her problem is that she thinks the tactics are all wrong. Oh, why is the right winning? Because their worldviews like ours are just better with the tactics. No, it's because their worldview is much closer to reality and actually getting us real prosperity.
It's like we're trained to say, no, rather than, yeah, let's go for it.
All right, not going to lie, now I'm lost.
If you are a political agent, you have to be a, yeah, let's go for it person. And I don't think I always am. I think sometimes I can be a no but person.
You don't always have to be a yes, let's go for it if you're a political actor. You know, Farage, great successful political actor, he definitely says, no, hang on, let's wait and think about this. Great example. He's always been against net zero policy. Didn't really start massively coming out with it until last year because it was clear that it was lunacy. That's a no, wait, but person. It's good stuff. There's a place for both in political activism.
And writing this book, I've tried to discover my inner, yeah, fuck it, go for it.
No, Ash, seriously, you need to be a no, but. You seriously need to be a no but. You are still, yeah, let's do it without really thinking about it. How can I tell? You've learned nothing, as I say. What's your main problem with the left at the moment? Oh, the tactics aren't working. You're not really saying why. Apparently your idea of, oh, it's not working is because you probably should have gone further than I'm literally a communist, you idiot. If there's one person who epitomises, yeah, screw it, let's do it without thinking, it is Ash Sarkar. So, again, the lesson she has learned here she's actually probably going to end up being worse over the next few years, incredibly. Anyway, Bastani seems to then have a realisation that the left wing's full of completely useless people.
These are all people that will work mega hard, will take mega risks, will risk their physical health for a greater good, and you think, wow, if you're thinking politically, that's a really good social base to draw on.
Yeah, it's nuts, isn't it? Why has the left managed to get everywhere it is at the moment? Because they use their intelligence as an advantage, and they had the long march through the institutions, they got into positions of power, you know, quite quietly. Don't get me wrong, these people worked quite hard, but the problem is that due to the realities of bio-Leninism, they end up putting useless people everywhere. And look what happens there. Countries start crumbling. And so what happens? Yeah, the productive areas of society start getting really annoyed because they're being held back by this, and they say, stop holding me back, which is a much better message than stop oppressing me. Because stop holding me back is technically saying stop oppressing me, it's just saying let me unleash my true self and my true productivity and allow me to effectively become a hero of my own story. Whereas when it comes to, you know, the bio-Leninist, you know, useless people in society, the unproductive people that the left constantly try and help, it's basically always, oh, just let me live a basic life and give me stuff to have this basic life. And it's just, it is not going to bring out the people that are hyper-productive, you know? It also doesn't help that a lot of these hyper-productive people, because a lot of them will be NPCs, they have effectively just been brainwashed into thinking that the most important thing in the world is to help the unproductive people and nothing else matters. That's why the NHS has become a state religion, because despite the fact that every European country can, well, effectively has universal healthcare to some degree, even though they have completely different systems that are more market-based and have an awful lot more private hospitals and things like that, they actually work better than our new national religion. And yet I know ridiculously productive people who thinks that all that matters is keeping the NHS running. Nothing else matters. And I'm just thinking, clearly there are other values we need here. You can't have an NHS unless you have a successful country first. The success of a country should not be based on, is the healthcare system running? A successful country just has a healthcare system. It's ridiculous. Anyway, Aaron Bastani goes on to talk about Dan Evans. If you don't know who it is, don't know, I don't either. Just some leftist commentator. But he's actually seems to have noticed that the leftist push really is from the managerial class and the graduate class and basically nobody else. So this is what Aaron has to expand on with that.
And that really got me thinking of what he talks about with the professional managerial class. And actually, how they view politics is in part, yes, it's about their job, but it's also about how they raise as children. Because their parents are managers. They see their parents their entire lives telling people what to do, bossing people around. The parents in their workplaces are used to telling people what to do. They're line managing people. When they go back to home, that's also how they treat the family, right?
I have to say, I don't know many managerial types, but I wouldn't be shocked if there was some truth to all this. However, it's not really explaining to me why they're left wing. I suppose the only hypothesis I can come up with is that, well, left wing philosophy is all about controlling and managing society. Right wing is actually quite the opposite usually. So maybe the whole idea of, I have to manage people, therefore society has to be managed, that naturally brings them to the left wing. So that's possibly true. But as I say again, it's not that Ash and Aaron don't think that this is bad for their worldview's wrong or anything like that. It's actually a lot closer to, we just need less boring people for our movement. That's effectively what they're saying here.
I mean, when I say overeducated and insecure, again, part of that is an age thing. I mean, come on, like when I was in my 20s, I was screamingly insecure.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts, isn't it? The politics of an insecure, overeducated class. Yeah, again, the worldview's wrong in and of itself, Ash, but you still have it. So to some extent, I would imagine you're still insecure. In fact, I know you are, because you said when writing your book, the best thing about it was that you're not getting immediate criticism of it. It's just nuts. I mean, I'm not being funny. I talk about a book I'm writing. All that I say writing is, I've been on chapter 1 for a year, but I'm constantly talking about ideas for it, and I'm totally fine with any criticism people have and ideas they throw out. It's fine. So I guess I'm less insecure than you. And look at that. My politics are more right wing. There's probably is actually it'd be neuroticism, wouldn't it? Neurotic people actually do tend to be more left wing, so there probably is something to this.
Absolutely just riddled with insecurity, terrified that nobody would find me if I didn't work overtime to make myself visible in some way.
Aaron starts to ask her, does she mean professionally? And she basically means no. Her worldview is, like an awful lot of leftists, their entire identity comes down to how intelligent do I look? Like, do I look like I'm working? Do I look like I'm useful? Whereas when it comes to the right wing, honestly, I don't think an awful lot of them care. Or if they do care, it's to, try and get a promotion, try and get somewhere up in the company. Get somewhere where they don't feel like they're going to be held back. That seems to be a large difference here. And I'm not necessarily saying being right wing's better. I am saying that when it comes to running a country, the right wing seems to have a better idea of what you should be doing. Because we've just had left wingers in charge basically since the start of the 20th century, and it's not all gone well. It's not all gone well at all.
The thing I'm talking about is the insecurity of being in your 20s and being like, how I'm just going to be like lost in this flood of humanity if there's not anything to give me a leg up, boost upwards.
Again, she's not necessarily talking to have a promotion. She's talking simply more of a case of, I want to stand out for the sake of it. That's effectively what she's saying there. Again, this was supposed to be a chat about what has she learned and when, and all I'm learning here is that she's still very, very insecure, and the way she's trying to stand out now is by effectively trying to be one of the people who's early to criticise the left for their complete failure to actually go any more left-wing, than the left-wing we currently have now, which is effectively neo-Keynesianism mixed with a whole bunch of woke stuff. For example, it's such a facade with Starmer and Labour government as well, because they know they're very unpopular, and so they're trying to do all these right-wing things like bring in Doge and things like that in a UK version, but basically nobody believes them. They lied throughout their manifesto. They haven't managed to deliver anything. Now we're all learning that we're going to have taxes again while they're saying they're going for growth, and people are like, hang on, it's been 6 months now. Okay, we're not expecting like utopia in 6 months, but we certainly didn't expect things to get like much worse. Like, not to the... How can you possibly say you're going for growth when everything you've done has given us negligible growth? Negative growth if you look at GDP per capita. But anyway, long story short, they're now trying to say, oh look, we're making public sector cuts. What's one of the first big announcements? We're cutting the male rape helpline. How much did that cost? $250,000 a year. It's the only way they're funded. Oh my god. This is all happening while they are begging Mauritius to take 18 billion from us to give away our islands as well. It's all a facade. People can see the contradictions plain as day, and they do nothing to try and address them. Just as Ash Sarkar isn't doing here. She's just saying, oh, there are contradictions, whatever. The tactics are all wrong, though. They're clearly not working. But she's really not giving any insight into what they should actually be doing.
And if I was called upon then, when I was 21, to be like, why don't you describe how a political culture should work, it would probably be on quite socially maladapted principles. That's also one of
Not being funny, Rash, your answer to that question is still socially maladapted.
the things that I'm trying to get at. So it's insecure. Obviously, there's economic insecurity, and the impact of economic security is a theme that runs the whole way through this book.
Yeah, I'm still none the wiser on how that necessarily leads to woke politics, but, you know, I can tell you why I think it happens. It's because, effectively, left-wingers had every other problem solved by right-wingers.
But also there's like an emotional, psychological insecurity as well, which I think you need to examine. Again, if you want to be an effective political actor, what is it Sun Tzu says? Know yourself and know your enemy, and you need not fear the outcome of 1,000 battles. In my early 20s, I did not know myself at all.
Well, I suppose that's one thing that she can say she's learned. She seems to have learned herself slightly more. I'm happy to say that. The problem is, you're supposed to learn yourself, realise parts of yourself that are either deadwood or bits you don't like, and change that. Ash hasn't done that. Again. She's not learned fundamental things that she actually needs to change about herself and her worldview. What she has learned is that her tactics don't work and haven't worked for 10 years. Like, okay, they did work for 10 years, but they stopped working now. And she clearly doesn't understand why, and she clearly doesn't know where to go from here. Anyway, if I did any more reaction to this, I'd just want to end it all. We're at nearly an hour. I think that'll do. I think you get the idea. I wasn't expecting much from Ash Sarkar here, and that's exactly what I got. So, with that, that's everything I had for you for today. So, shield time. No Antiquity stream tonight because Jack wants to watch football. Fair enough. Tosh Talks will be on Wednesday. I believe we'll be reacting to a video by Middle East Eye on Enoch Powell and why he's far right or something. It'll be good. If you enjoy what I do subscribe, like, and leave a comment telling me what you think. Those are the freest, cheapest, and easiest ways to help me out with my channel. If you think I deserve a bit more, you can always send a super thanks or super chat in any stream or video that I make, along with becoming a member for £2 a month, which gives you access to all of my old streams. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you for today. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.